You're 8 years old. You're drawing a unicorn. White horse, rainbow spiral horn coming out of the forehead at a slightly wrong angle because you're 8 and perspective is hard. And somewhere around the time you finish, an adult leans over your shoulder and says the thing every adult says. You know those aren't real, right? And you nodded. Because obviously, unicorns go in the same box as dragons and fairies and the tooth fairy's questionable dental economy. Made up, cute, fine for a bedsheet. Except that adult was wrong. Not wrong in a cute way. Not wrong in a actually, in a sense, metaphorically way. Wrong in the sense that for roughly 2,000 years, the unicorn was a documented animal. It appeared in medical texts. It was hunted. Kings paid more for its horn than for entire castles. Serious naturalists argued about its diet. It sat in the Bible. And the reason you think it's fake isn't that it never existed. It's that we lost the paperwork. So what actually happened here? How does a real animal, tracked across 3 continents and 100 generations of scholarship, get demoted to a birthday cake decoration? The answer involves a Greek doctor who never left his room, a mistranslation that hijacked a religion, a 2-ton Siberian monster, a whale, and a German scientist who built the world's most confidently wrong skeleton. Let's go. Start with the doctor. Around 400 BC, a Greek physician named Ctesias was working in the Persian court. Good gig. Personal doctor to the king. And while he was there, he collected stories from traders coming up out of India, a place Ctesias had, and this is important, never been. He wrote them down, and in one of those entries, he described an animal. Wild ass, size of a horse, white body, dark red head, blue eyes. And on the forehead, a single horn about 18 inches long, white at the base, black in the middle, crimson at the tip. He said it was fast. He said it was impossible to catch alive. He said hunters could only kill it, never take it. And then he added the detail that would make it immortal. He wrote that drinking from a cup made of that horn would protect you from poison and seizures. Here's the thing people get wrong about Ctesias. He wasn't lying. He wasn't writing fiction. He was doing his best. Because that description, that's a rhinoceros. Probably the Indian rhino, filtered through 4 traders, 2 languages, and about 3,000 kilometers of telephone game. Somebody saw a real animal. Somebody described it to somebody else, and by the time it reached a Greek man's writing desk, the armor plating had become white fur and the horn had picked up a color scheme. That's not a myth being born. That's data degrading, and the world took it completely seriously. Because why wouldn't it? Ctesias was a credentialed physician writing a natural history. There was no reason to doubt him. Aristotle mentions single-horned animals. Pliny the Elder catalogues the unicorn in his encyclopedia in the 1st century AD and calls it the fiercest animal in India, impossible to capture alive. Pliny wasn't writing fantasy. Pliny was writing the closest thing the ancient world had to Wikipedia, and the unicorn was in it, filed under animals, right next to the elephant. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange. Around the 3rd century BC, a team of scholars in Alexandria sat down to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Huge job, enormously consequential, and they hit a word. Riem. Nobody's totally sure what a riem was. The best guess now is the aurochs, a gigantic wild ox, extinct since 1627. An animal so powerful it shows up in Hebrew scripture as a symbol of raw, untamable strength. But by the 3rd century BC, in Alexandria, in Egypt, the aurochs wasn't around. The translators had a word for an animal they'd never seen, so they picked the closest thing they knew. Rhinoceros. One horn. And with that single word, the unicorn stopped being a travel rumor and became scripture. It's in Numbers. It's in Job. It's in Psalms. Save me from the lion's mouth and from the horns of the unicorns. Translated into Latin. Translated into English in the King James Version in 1611. Let that sink in for a second. For over 1,000 years across Christian Europe, denying the existence of the unicorn wasn't skepticism. It was closer to heresy. God had listed it. The animal was canon. You want to know why the unicorn beat every other mythical creature and lodged itself so deeply into Western culture that it's still on children's lunchboxes 400 years later? This is why. It had institutional backing. The dragon never got that. The dragon was a story. The unicorn was in the manual. And then there's the part where it was actually physically real. Elasmotherium sibericum, 2 meters at the shoulder, 4.5 meters long, somewhere between 2 and 4 tons, heavier than a car, roughly the mass of an adult male elephant. Shaggy, built like a bison that got bad news. And on its skull, a bone dome so massive and so structurally reinforced that paleontologists are confident it supported a single enormous keratin horn. Estimates put it at up to 1 meter long. Some go further. It lived across the Eurasian steppe, Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, the edges of Ukraine. It grazed. It was, by every meaningful definition, a giant one-horned mammal walking around Siberia. And it has a nickname you can probably guess: the Siberian Unicorn. For most of the 20th century, the story was tidy. Elasmotherium went extinct around 350,000 years ago, long before anatomically modern humans came anywhere near the steppe. Cool animal. No connection. Coincidence. Then in 2018, a team led by researchers at the Natural History Museum in London ran radiocarbon dating on Elasmotherium remains. The number came back at roughly 39,000 years. Not 350,000. 39,000. Which means it wasn't gone before we arrived. It was here. It was standing on the same steppe, drinking from the same rivers while modern humans were making tools and painting caves and burying their dead. Our species and the Siberian unicorn overlapped for thousands of years. Somebody saw that animal. Somebody stood at a distance in the cold and watched 2 tons of horned mammal move across the grass and went home and told people about it. And then that person died, and their grandchildren told it, and their grandchildren told it, and the horn stayed in the story long after the animal left the world. We can't prove the line runs unbroken from an Elasmotherium sighting to Theseus's desk. That's not a claim the evidence supports, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the thing everyone assumed, that no human ever laid eyes on a real unicorn, turns out to be flatly false. They did. We have the dates. Let's pause here, because the skeptic in the room has a fair point and it deserves respect. The objection goes like this. That's not a unicorn. That's a rhino relative. A unicorn is a horse. White, graceful, in a meadow. You've just told me a large, ugly mammal existed and called it a unicorn to win an argument. And honestly, that's a good objection. The white horse is not Elasmotherium. Nobody's confusing them. But look at what that objection is actually doing. It's taking the final, most decorated, most Disney-fied version of the unicorn, a version that only stabilized around the medieval period, largely through tapestry and religious allegory, and declaring that to be the real definition, then measuring everything against it. That's backwards. That's like saying dinosaurs weren't real because chickens don't look like Jurassic Park. The unicorn was never one animal. It was a category, a filing drawer labeled one horn. And for 2,000 years, people kept putting real things in it. The rhino went in. The oryx went in. And if you've ever seen an oryx in profile, standing side-on with 2 long, straight horns perfectly overlapping into what looks exactly like one, you understand instantly how that happened. The Elasmotherium may have gone in. The unicorn wasn't fiction. It was a taxonomy error that lasted 20 centuries. But the skeptic is still owed an answer, because there's a real question buried in there, and it's the best question in this whole story. If the unicorn started as a rhinoceros, armored, gray, 2 tons, roughly as graceful as a filing cabinet falling downstairs, then how, in God's name, did it end up as a white horse? Somebody rewrote it, on purpose. Around the 2nd century AD, an anonymous text starts circulating out of Alexandria called the Physiologus. It's a collection of animals paired with moral lessons. The pelican means this, the phoenix means that, and it becomes one of the most copied books in Europe for the next 1,000 years, translated into Latin, Ethiopic, Armenian, Old English, everywhere. And the physiologus has an entry on the unicorn, and it says something new. It says the unicorn is small and fierce and so fast and so strong that no hunter can take it by force. Ever. Force doesn't work. But, and here's the mechanism that changed everything, it can be captured by exactly one method. You lead a virgin girl into the forest, and you leave her there alone. And the unicorn, which has evaded every spear and every hound in the world, comes to her, and lays its head in her lap, and falls asleep. And then the hunters come out of the trees and kill it. That is not a nature note. That's an allegory, and everyone reading it in the medieval church knew exactly what it meant. The unicorn is Christ. The horn is divine power. The virgin is Mary. The capture is the incarnation. The killing is the crucifixion. The whole thing is a compressed theological diagram wearing an animal costume. And once the unicorn is playing that role, it can't stay a rhino. Because now it has a job. It has to be pure, so it turns white. It has to be innocent, so it gets smaller. It has to be gentle enough to fall asleep in a lap and noble enough to represent God, so it loses the armor and the bulk and picks up the horse's body, the goat's beard, the cloven hooves, the slim spiral horn. Look at the hunt of the unicorn tapestries, woven around 1500, hanging in the cloisters in New York right now, and you can watch it finished. That animal is not descended from a rhinoceros. It's descended from a sermon. So the white horse the skeptic wants to defend as the real unicorn? That's the newest part. That's the paint. Underneath it is a 2,000-year-old zoological record with actual animals in it, and somewhere near the bottom of the pile, a real horned giant on a real step. The myth didn't grow out of nothing. It grew over something. And then it got a lot weirder because somebody figured out how to sell it. The horn. Here's the situation in medieval Europe. Everyone knows unicorns exist. Pliny said so, the Bible said so, case closed. Everyone knows the horn cures poison, because Ctesias said so and nobody's checking. And in a period where political assassination by poison is a genuine, constant, extremely real occupational hazard for anyone with power, that makes unicorn horn the single most valuable substance on the continent. Powdered and swallowed, it was supposed to cure plague, fever, epilepsy, and rabies. Carved into a cup, it was supposed to neutralize any poison poured into it. Some accounts claimed it would sweat or change color in the presence of venom, an alarm system, essentially. So the horns showed up, long, white, perfectly spiraled, twisting counterclockwise all the way to a fine point. 6, 7, 8 feet. They were beautiful. They were unmistakable. They were, without exception, narwhal tusks. The narwhal is an Arctic whale with an enormous protruding tooth. Norse traders in Greenland and Iceland were hunting them, harvesting the tusks, sailing south, and selling them into Europe as unicorn horn for centuries. They knew exactly what they were doing. The location of the source was one of the most valuable trade secrets in the medieval world, guarded like a shipping lane. The prices are hard to process. Unicorn horn traded at roughly 10 times its weight in gold. Queen Elizabeth I is said to have received one valued at $10,000, the price of a castle, an entire castle, for a tooth, and the crown jewel, literally, the throne chair of Denmark, built in the 1660s, constructed substantially from what the Danish monarchy believed to be unicorn horn. Narwhal. The whole thing. Danish kings were crowned in a chair made of whale teeth, and it is still there in Rosenborg Castle, and you can go look at it. Nobody was being stupid. That's what gets me about this. Everyone in that chain was reasoning correctly from the information they had. The horn was real. You could hold it. The animal was documented by physicians and by scripture. The logic was airtight. The only broken link was one Greek doctor's second-hand notes, 400 years before Christ, and nobody could see it from the inside. And then the unicorn was built. Magdeburg, Germany. Workers quarrying for limestone in a cave hit a jumble of fossilized bone. Ice Age bone, mammoth, rhinoceros, mixed, shattered, no context. Otto von Guericke gets involved, and Otto von Guericke is not a crank. He's a serious scientist. He invented the vacuum pump. He ran the famous Magdeburg Hemispheres experiment where two teams of horses couldn't pull apart two evacuated metal bowls. Real credentials, real rigor. He looks at this pile of bones. He knows unicorns exist, because everyone knows unicorns exist. And he does what any careful scientist does with fragmentary evidence. He reconstructs it according to the best available model. The best available model is a unicorn. The result is one of the great artifacts in the history of human error. 2 legs, a body that ends in nothing, a skull with an enormous horn jammed onto the front of it. It looks like a creature assembled by someone who had the concept of animal described to them over a bad phone line. And it was published. Leibniz, Gottfried Leibniz, co-inventor of calculus, one of the sharpest minds in European history, included an illustration of that reconstruction in his work on the natural history of the Earth. It circulated as evidence. That's not stupidity. That's the most dangerous thing in science, which is a strong prior. Von Guericke didn't find a unicorn. He found bones, and the unicorn was already in his head, and the bones did what bones do. They let you see what you brought with you. So what killed it? Not skepticism. Not one guy standing up and saying, "Come on, everyone, comparative anatomy killed it." Specifically, the late 1700s and Georges Cuvier, who established that the structure of an animal is not a set of interchangeable parts, that anatomy is a system where every element constrains every other one. And Cuvier pointed out something devastatingly simple. A cloven-hoofed animal has a split frontal bone. The skull is divided down the middle. There is no solid platform in the center of the forehead for a single horn to attach to. You cannot bolt a horn onto that skull. The architecture doesn't allow it. So the classical unicorn, cloven hooves, goat beard, one horn, wasn't just unobserved. It was structurally impossible. Not rare, not hiding, impossible. And notice how strange that is as a way to kill an animal. Nobody went to the forest and failed to find it. Nobody ran an expedition. Cuvier sat in a room in Paris with a skull in his hands and reasoned the unicorn out of existence from the geometry of a bone, which is roughly the intellectual equivalent of proving your neighbor's car doesn't exist by looking at his driveway. It worked because he was right about the system. The same principle that let him look at a single fossil tooth and correctly reconstruct an animal nobody had ever seen. Anatomy is a language with grammar. And the unicorn was a sentence that didn't parse. And at the same time, the Arctic opened up. The narwhal got described. The trade secret collapsed. The horn stopped being an artifact from a mystery and became a tooth from a whale, and the whole 2,000-year edifice came down in about a generation. The unicorn didn't get disproven. It got sorted. Every real thing in the drawer got pulled out and filed properly. Rhino here, oryx there, narwhal over there, Elasmotherium in the extinct pile. And when the sorting was done, the drawer was empty. What was left over, the part that didn't correspond to any animal, is the part we handed to children. Here's what I keep coming back to. When that adult told you unicorns weren't real, they were repeating the end of a story without knowing there was one. They thought they were correcting a fantasy. They were actually reporting the outcome of a 2,000-year scientific investigation that involved Persian courts and Greek physicians and Alexandrian translators and Norse whalers and a German vacuum pump inventor with a pile of mammoth bones, and they didn't know any of that, and neither did you, and neither did I. The unicorn wasn't a lie people believed. It was a hypothesis people held me for 20 centuries, with the best evidence they had, and they tested it, and they were wrong, and the being wrong took 100 generations and a whole science to unwind. That's not embarrassing. That's the machine working, slowly, correctly. And somewhere on a cold steppe about 39,000 years ago, before Ctesias, before Alexandria, before any of it, a real one-horned animal the size of an elephant lifted its head from the grass and looked at a human being. And the human went home and told someone. We've been repeating that story ever since. We just forgot where it came from.